All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So, folks, the field is set for the inaugural 12-team college football playoff. And of course, it's not without controversy or an exciting conference championship weekend. So we're looking at the seeds right now, the 12 teams that are in the playoff tournament. You've got Oregon number one, Georgia at two, Boise State at three, and Arizona State at four. So these are the four conference champions that are going to be getting first round buys. We've then got Texas at number five, the top at large team, apparently. Six is Penn State, seven is Notre Dame, eight, Ohio State, nine, Tennessee, 10 Indiana, 11 SMU, and 12 Clemson, who are the ACC champions. And of course, if you watched Conference Championship weekend, Conference Championship Saturday, okay, if you watched that ACC Championship game last night, it was a thriller. And like the title says, March Madness has come to college football. And it was one of those where, as Clemson won that game in walk-off fashion, if this was college basketball, they would have been a bracket buster, a team that needed to win in order to get to the postseason. They did so, and in the process, they bursted a team's bubble that was trying to get in. So first and foremost, with Clemson winning the ACC championship last night, credit to them. And credit to their head coach Dabo Sweeney for sticking to who he is, because you remember last year when Clemson was 4-4 and they finished the season not 4-4 in the ACC, and they finished the year 9-4 overall. There were a lot of people who were critical of Dabo Sweeney. There were a lot of people who were critical about the fact that he has not embraced the transfer portal, you name it. And Dabo basically said, listen, you better buy Clemson stock now while it's low. Now, of course, Clemson added to that to begin this season by getting blown out in Atlanta, courtesy of Georgia. But they were able to navigate their way to get to the ACC championship game. For Clemson's sake, two of their three losses were out of conference. They came against SEC schools. They lost at the end of the regular season at home to South Carolina. But nonetheless, when Miami lost to Syracuse in the previous Saturday, that opened the door for Clemson to get to the ACC championship game. And to their credit, they made the most of it. If you are from a power conference, you win that conference championship, you get an automatic bid to the college football playoff. So Clemson, they played by the rules, and guess what? They are in. But at the end of the day, you wondered if Clemson getting in would, mark the end of SMU's playoff chances, and it didn't, as the College Football Playoff Committee decided to take 11-2 SMU, the ACC runner-up, over 9-3 Alabama from the Southeastern Conference. And it's one of those where clearly SMU won more games than Alabama. They went 11-2 while the Crimson Tide went 9-3. SMU was able to get to their conference championship game. Alabama was not. One of the biggest differences, of course, the strength of the ACC was not on the same level as the strength of the SEC. Alabama did have three losses, all within conference, at Vanderbilt, at Tennessee, and then, of course, a couple of weeks ago at Oklahoma. And I'll tell you like this, Alabama does have a legit gripe as far as not being in the college football playoff. However, Alabama, like every other team that was right in that bubble that did not get in, they lost games that they had an opportunity to win. They lost games that they were favored to win. And I guarantee you, if Alabama doesn't lose to Vanderbilt earlier this season, or if Alabama doesn't lose to Oklahoma, a 6-6 team this year, and get blown out by Oklahoma in the process, we're not having this conversation right now. At the end of the day, you've got to go out there and take care of your business. So it's one of those, I've talked about this and I'm going to talk about it more right now. You look at the mega conferences right now where all schedules are not created equal. We've got some 16, 17, and 18 team leagues. Guess what? If you got a conference that big, you're not playing each other. You're not playing everybody. And then on top of that, everybody's schedule is not going to be the same. Georgia didn't have the same schedule as Texas. Texas didn't have the same schedule as Alabama in the SEC. We can go right down the list. You could look at SMU in the ACC. You could look at Miami in the ACC. They didn't play the same people. The same thing could be said about the Big 12. And me personally, this is one thing I question when a lot of these leagues decided to go to these mega formats. Why? Because it's one of those where everybody involved, they were just chasing the dollar signs. They weren't worried about things like this. Okay, because at the end of the day, when you have a league that big, football wise, you're not playing everybody. Okay, it's not the same schedule, and it's not. I know NFL wise, you got two conferences. Okay, two 16 team conferences. Everybody clearly doesn't play everybody, but nonetheless, it's not a scenario where you're putting it down to a committee to put somebody in or not put somebody in. But with that said, sometimes the teams that do have easier schedules in the National Football League are able to take advantage of it and get to the postseason. But when it's all said and done, aside from Alabama, South Carolina, Miami, and Ole Miss, they might all be playing the what about me card right now. And like I said, you've got to go out there and win the games. Now, South Carolina's three losses, they came to Ole Miss, they came to Alabama, and they came to LSU. So, of course, if South Carolina has a gripe, they got to look at Ole Miss and Alabama ahead of them. And South Carolina is going to sit back and say, well, wait a minute. We just beat the ACC champion Clemson, which is legit. Miami, again, they control their own destiny until the loss to Syracuse a couple of weeks ago. And actually, the Hurricanes actually lost two out of their last three as they fell on the road to Georgia Tech. Now, very interesting things, the way I'm looking at it for this committee. They did not hold it, and they talked about not doing this, but talk is cheap. They did not hold it against either Penn State or Texas for losing their respective conference championship games last night. Okay, both the Nittany Lions and Longhorns were already safely in the field. But you look at the seeding, Texas got number 5, and then Penn State got number 6. And in doing so, they bumped Notre Dame down. That was a big question for me, was whether or not, because the Fighting Irish looked like they were entrenched at number 5, and I was just curious to see what would happen. Now, clearly, I really thought Notre Dame was going to move down at least one slot. And the reason was, you look at Penn State and Oregon. Penn State was ranked number 3 heading into last night's Big Ten championship game against top ranked Oregon. What would have happened if Penn State had won that game? Clearly, they would have moved up. Oregon would have had to have been the highest ranked at large team in the field. But nonetheless, you look at it, and the Fighting Irish are down to 7. Ryan, what is going on out there? You're saying the CFP rankings are a joke, and it's one of those. I'll tell you like this: I did not think that the committee was going to do it to Alabama. I really thought, okay, even though that SMU came back, it was a frantic comeback, and they lost on that walk-off kick. I thought that the committee was going to say, you know what? Alabama's in and SMU is not, and they didn't do it. I was extremely surprised by it, and I guarantee you the folks in Tuscaloosa are not thrilled at this point, and they're not going to be thrilled for quite some time for the matter going forward. But nonetheless, we've got Oregon, who is the top ranked team in this field, and they deserve to be. Why? Because the Ducks are the only undefeated team at the FBS level, and they just won the Big Ten. So let's see what happens with the Ducks. Something else that's going to be very interesting for me. Uh, Georgia got the 2 seed, and you had to expect that after they won the SEC. How's that Carson Beck injury going to change things? Because when I saw Carson Beck go out with that injury, and then you see him come out for the second half of the SEC championship game with that ice pack on, and then even when Gunnar Stockton got hurt late in that contest when he took that hit at the goal line, and Carson Beck came in for the game-winning play. He was that right arm was dangling. So when I looked at the injury for Carson Beck on that attempted Hail Mary just before the first half, the first thing that came to mind was Brock Purdy a couple of years ago for the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. Maybe, maybe, if you're a Georgia fan, you're optimistic. But I mean, I'm not a Georgia fan, and I'll tell you like this. I would be surprised if Carson Beck is ready to go for the playoff. One thing that helped Georgia was them winning the championship game last night. So clearly they get a first round bye. So there's some optimism. They want to send them for X-rays or whatever like that, but it did not look pretty. Ryan, you're saying I really don't think Alabama did enough. Well, they had 3 wins against teams that were ranked in the top 25. That's all well and good, but again, you got to take care of your business. And even after the Vanderbilt loss, I think they were safely in until they got blown out at by Oklahoma. Oklahoma finished 6-6 this season. They just beat Alabama by 3 touchdowns. That's what really did them in. And it's one of those where clearly, the infant stages of the CFP rankings are like it's a lot based off of you know, the rankings coming into the season. And of course, Alabama, they scheduled a non-conference game at Wisconsin. And of course, they weren't expected to contend for a Big Ten championship this year, but they were still expected to be better than what they were this season. And then of course, Alabama had the hottest win early on in the season as they won that contest against Georgia, and they almost lost that game because the dogs were coming back. They took the lead, and then Alabama found it at the end. We saw Alabama right after that. At the time, it looked like they were struggling at home because they were heavily favored over South Carolina. And who knew that Shane Beamer was going to rally the Gamecocks like he did? South Carolina came very close to beating LSU at home. And of course, South Carolina losing their starting quarterback in that game hurt them there. But nonetheless, the loss to Vanderbilt really set the Crimson Tide back. Losing to Tennessee, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Neyland Stadium in Knoxville is not easy, and Josh Heupel has really turned things around there. And then, of course, the Oklahoma loss. Those were big right there. So you could take your pick, whether it was the Vanderbilt loss or the Oklahoma loss, which one hurt Alabama the more. And honestly, I'm going to say it was Oklahoma because no disrespect to the Sooners, but they were 6-6. They didn't have a lot of things going on offensively this year. All of the injuries at wide receiver, all of the inconsistencies at the quarterback position, and the Sooners simply dominated the Crimson Tide a couple of Saturday nights ago in Norman. So that's really, to me, what did in the Crimson Tide there. But then going right down this list, you look at the committee and credit to them. I didn't think they were going to do this as well. After Arizona State, won the Big 12 yesterday, and, clearly when SMU lost, that opened up a first round bye. But nonetheless, the committee gave the Fiesta Bowl in the quarterfinal round to Boise and not Arizona State. So now the Sun Devils, they got to travel to Atlanta for the Peach Bowl. That's going to be very interesting right there while Boise gets the Fiesta Bowl. And of course, historically, the Broncos have done well at I know it's not University of Phoenix stadium anymore. I think it's State Farm Stadium in Glendale, but nonetheless, the Broncos historically have done pretty good there. You think about the Statue of Liberty play nearly 20 years ago to knock off Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, but nonetheless, it's going to be Bronco Nation heading down to the desert for that one. So you look at it right now with this field of 12, and one question is going to be who has, or who do I feel has the easiest path to win a championship? And if I were to pick a team, I'd say Georgia. If Carson Beck is healthy, because you look at it, they'll get the winner of Notre Dame, Indiana, and if Notre Dame gets out of round number one, it's a situation where I'm not sure if they have enough offense to give Georgia's defense a problem. That's going to be the biggest thing for me. Who do I feel has the toughest path to get to the championship? I'm going to go with Oregon because you look at the Ducks They're the top rated team in this tournament. But then there's a possibility, okay, that they could face Ohio State in round number two. And of course, they beat Ohio State this season in Eugene by 1 point, a game that a lot of people feel like the Buckeyes should have won. Of course, Ohio State could turn around and lose in round number one to Tennessee, and then the Ducks could have to face um, the Volunteers at the Rose Bowl. Then, if Oregon does survive there, there's a possibility of having to take on Arizona State or Texas in the semi. So it's a lot of things right there. Me personally, I think the Ducks have the hardest path, but nonetheless, to your point, Oregon, they just simply been finding a way to win. They found a way to win that game against Ohio State. They found a way to win last night, and they made the key plays against Penn State. And remember, the Ducks beat Boise, and it is one of those where you know what. I think a lot of people didn't pay too much attention to that game because Oregon had started off so slow this season. But you know what? Boise State's got a darn good team as well, and the Ducks found a way to get them to beat them. So they're battle tested, but I still believe that they have the toughest path to get to a championship. Now, which team or head coach has the most pressure for this tournament? And I got a couple of teams. Number one, I'm going to say Penn State, and I'm going to say James Franklin. Why? Because if you look at James Franklin's less than stellar record against top 10 teams, uh, it every time that Penn State plays a top ranked team, people are always going to be questioning what Franklin does or does not do. And of course, that was once again the case last night as Penn State fell to Oregon 45-37. Make no mistake about it. It was a good game. The Nittany Lions did have their opportunities to win that game, but they've got to play better in the playoff if they're going to look to advance. And they've got a tough SMU team coming to Happy Valley in a couple of weeks. For me, another team that I'm going to put the pressure on, I'm going to say Boise. And the reason is because you're going to have those people who only focus on the Power Four conferences. You're going to have those people that feel like the first round buys should be the exclusive province of the power conferences. Boise State played darn good this season. Boise State deserved their 3 seed. So I guarantee you the haters are going to go out there and look for Boise to have any type of slip up so they could simply say, hey, I told you so. But nonetheless, I think Boise and Spencer Danielson and company are going to be ready for the quarterfinals in Glendale, whether they get SMU or Penn State out there at State Farm Stadium. We got to wait and see. But nonetheless, I do think the Broncos will be ready. I'm also putting the onus on Texas because when Texas is on point, I feel like they can beat anybody in the country. They basically have this season, with the exception of Georgia. But nonetheless, Texas has all of the talent in the world to come out and win this whole tournament. But if Texas doesn't lace them up, and if they're not ready to go against Clemson in the first round, well, guess what? They could be sent home very early on. Another team I'm going to put in that pressure category, I'm going to say SMU. And the reason why I'm going to say SMU is this, because you got people out there who feel that SMU doesn't deserve to be in this tournament. So, of course, people are going to look for SMU to have any type of slip up so they could say, hey, I told you so. And Ryan, getting back to your comment, yeah, they look good against everybody else in regards to Texas, with the exception of the Bulldogs. That's now 2 times. And finally, the last team that I feel like, or head coach that I feel like has the most pressure on them heading into this tournament, I'm going to say the Ohio State Buckeyes, because you look at Ohio State, okay, and just like I talked about James Franklin, Ryan Day at Ohio State does not have the best record against top ranked teams in the top 10. And it's one of those where everything was set up for Ohio State. People question Ryan Day's play calling and game management following the loss to Oregon earlier this season. Everything was set up for the Buckeyes to get to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game and have that rematch with Oregon. But once again, Day and the Buckeyes came up short against Michigan, and it's now 4 straight years that Days Buckeyes have lost to the Wolverines. So, of course, if you're at Ohio State, you don't want to lose to Michigan. Just ask, John Cooper about his reputation when he was a head coach at Ohio State for the bulk of the 1990s. So they had a tough loss to finish their regular season. Let's see how they look at home in round number one against the Tennessee Volunteers. And on the flip side, what teams do I feel are playing with house money coming into this tournament? I'm going to start off with Arizona State because nobody, with the exception of the folks in that program in Tempe at the beginning of the season, felt like the Sun Devils could be here. They were picked dead last in the Big 12. They won it, and they won it in dominating fashion. And you look over the last 5 or 6 weeks of the college football season, there weren't too many teams rather around the nation that have been playing better football than Arizona State. And I mean, running back Cam Scatterbo, he is a nightmare. And that Iowa State defense never had a chance as they were trying to tackle him high yesterday, and they were bouncing off of him rather, like ping pong balls. So it's one of those where I think the Sun Devils, they are playing with house money. Nobody expected them to be here. And regardless, if they got to face Clemson or Texas in Atlanta, it's one of those where they might be the underdog in that game. And Kenny Dillingham is going to have his team ready to play. So I think the Sun Devils fall into that house money category. I'm also going to put the Indiana Hoosiers there because, like Arizona State, how many people expected Indiana to be here, more or less finish with a winning record? They took advantage of not having to play the top tier teams in the Big Ten. Again, you don't apologize for who's on your schedule, but you still got to go out there and win games. Now, their one legit game, they did get blown out at the hands of Ohio State. Now, Kurt Signetti, Indiana's head coach, was lobbying for the Hoosiers to get a home game. They're clearly not going to get a home game. They're going to be in their home state. But nonetheless, Indiana will take the field at South Bend in a couple of weeks to face Notre Dame, and they have absolutely nothing to lose. And finally, the last team that I'm going to say is playing with house money coming into this tournament is the ACC champions. It's the Clemson Tigers because, all of the talk preseason as far as who's going to win the ACC was centered around Florida State, and it was also centered around Miami. And clearly, neither one of those teams made the ACC championship game. Miami went 10-2, while Florida State went 2-10. And Clemson very quietly flew under the radar. The ACC is not a strong league, but of course, somebody's got to win it. Somebody's got to get that automatic bid. Clemson was not favored last night taking the field against Southern Methodist. But who knows more about Charlotte? Who knows more about winning the ACC championship game than Dabo Sweeney and Clemson? And they simply went out there and found a way. I guarantee you, I haven't seen the spreads for the first round, but Clemson is going to be the heavy underdogs when they go to Austin to take on the Texas Longhorns. And I guarantee you, Dabo, the savvy vet that he is, he's going to have his Tigers ready to play against the Horns. You're saying Miami is still the best team in the ACC, in your opinion. I ain't going to argue with that. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, you look at the quarterback play, you look at the team from top to bottom, but the bottom line is the Canes didn't take care of their business when they needed to. And just jumping the shark here a little bit, what was going to hurt Miami and what did hurt Miami was the fact that a lot of those games that they won, they beat mediocre teams. I get it, but they struggled or they had to come back, in late fashion and get a miracle. It was a questionable non-call when they beat Virginia Tech. They had to fight, scrap, and claw to come back and eke out a 1-point win in Berkeley against Cal. And I think Cal at one point was up by like 3 touchdowns in that contest. And then, the cherry on the top, for Miami's issues was they were up 21-0 last Saturday on the road against Syracuse, and they let Syracuse come back. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Syracuse won 9 games this year, but you didn't think of Syracuse as a juggernaut. And again, Syracuse is another one of those teams. They really just took advantage of those mediocre clubs. Listen, I'm in agreement with you. As far as the talent of Miami. Was Miami more talented than SMU? Absolutely. Was Miami more talented than Clemson? Absolutely. But it's just one of those things. They fall into that same category with Alabama. I mean, Alabama is more talented than some of the teams that are in this field. But if you don't go out there and take care of your business, guess what? You're going to be sitting home, watching these proceedings with us. But you look at this tournament, and they got to me. I think there's some very intriguing matchups for round number one. First for me is Tennessee traveling to Columbus to take on Ohio State. Josh Heupel is going to have his team ready to play. The question is for me, what mindset is Ohio State going to have um, after their loss to Michigan? Because you look at it, Ohio State is another one of those teams. They beat Penn State, who got to the Big Ten championship game. They lost at Oregon by 1 point. So the Buckeyes are like, man, what could have been? The Buckeyes are one of the most talented teams in college football on both sides of the ball. The play calling has to be better offensively than it was against Michigan. The execution offensively has to be much better than it was against Michigan. So, sometimes, we've seen in the past where teams lose their final game of the season, whether it's to a rival or whether it's to an unranked opponent, whatever, and it knocks them out. It might have knocked them out of the 14 college football playoff. It might have knocked them out of the BCS, and then they went to their bowl game and laid an egg. So if you're Ohio State, you're not necessarily per se technically going to a bowl game, but you still got an opportunity to try to right the ship. So I want to see how Ryan Day's club is going to look against Tennessee. That's a big one for me right there. Another thing is SMU traveling to Happy Valley to take on Penn State because SMU is another one of those teams that got a reprieve. Penn State is another team that got a reprieve as well because in years past, with James Franklin's struggles against top ranked teams, it would have meant that Penn State would never have got to the Big Ten championship game. Of course, that was different this year because there's no more divisional format. And then B, the Nittany Lions would have still gotten to a New Year Six, but they would have not had an opportunity to get to the college football playoff. Clearly, that has changed now. And of course, in recent years, with James Franklin's and Penn State struggles against Michigan and Ohio State, that's basically what has kept them out of the college football playoff. They get that opportunity now. They're going to get home field advantage. Penn State is clearly the better team than SMU. And then on top of that, um, I'm no meteorologist, but more than likely, the Mustangs are not going to have great weather greeting them when they get to Western Pennsylvania in a couple of weeks for this game. So that's going to be interesting to see right there. Then defensively, Penn State didn't look good last night against Oregon, but Oregon has a darn good offense. So I want to see how this Penn State defense is able or tries to turn it around against the Mustangs. You're saying SMU is about to get smacked. Again, that's one of those games right there. I have not seen the spread, but I would expect the Nittany Lions to be favored at home by at least a touchdown in that one. Then another game that I'm looking forward to in round number one that has plenty of intrigue, the battle in the Hoosier State. When you think about the great state of Indiana, you think about the basketball history. There's football history there too. And of course, it starts with Notre Dame and the Fighting Irish, of course, who are a football independent, albeit they play 5 games against ACC opponents and they get some of that ACC money. That's another topic for another day. But nonetheless, they get Indiana. And of course, the Hoosiers did go 11-1 during this season. And of course, they're another one of those teams where people say, well, they really didn't play anybody. Well, we're about to find out. Notre Dame has been a different team, okay, ever since the Northern Illinois loss. They rebounded, they took care of their business. And I think the Fighting Irish are going to be ready for this one. I think the Hoosiers are going to be ready for this one. I think this could be a very interesting game here, nonetheless. But you look at this thing, somebody's going to try to make it win, all 4 games coming from the first round. And if I had to pick a team out of all of the teams in round number one who is best equipped to do it, I'm going to say Texas because you look at it, I think if the Longhorns show up and show out like they are capable of doing, I think Texas can make a run in this thing. It's just a matter of them showing up and showing out. Defensively, they've been playing good. We saw them play good against A&M to finish the regular season. Defensively, they were good against Carson Beck. I don't think that they were fully prepared, for Gunnar Stockton in that game. But it really wasn't the arm of Gunnar Stockton. At that point, Georgia focused more on their running game. That was a big thing for me. But I think Texas defensively will be ready to go. They just need Quinn Ewers to play within the system and not try to go out there and play hero ball. Will he be able to do it? We got to wait and see. But then you look at the quarterfinals, and there is the potential for some very intriguing matchups there as well. I'm looking at the possibility of seeing Ohio State, Oregon, two teams that were ranked in the top five for the bulk of the season. And then on top of that, the committee talked about it, but talk is cheap. I did not think that they were going to set it up to either possibly have two teams from the same conference in round number one or definitely in the quarterfinals. I thought they might have tried to save it for at least the semis, but nonetheless, there's a possibility that we get the rematch between Ohio State and Oregon in round number two. This time around, it would be in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl. For me, another interesting matchup that I'm looking at possibly in round number two, I'm looking at the Fiesta Bowl, and there's a possibility that we could see Penn State take on Boise State. And like I said, whoever the Broncos face, whether it's going to be Penn State or whether it's going to be SMU, I think that they are going to be ready. And for anybody who has not seen Ashton Genty play football this season, they're in for a treat in that one. And when that game tips off, we might be talking about Ashton Genty as the winner of the 2024 Heisman Trophy. Got to wait and see. And another potential contest that I'm looking forward to in the quarterfinal round could be Notre Dame taking on Georgia in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. It's one of those where we know what Georgia brings to the table. We know what Notre Dame brings to the table defensively. But for me, it's a lot of intrigue coming down to the availability of Carson Beck. Will he be available for Georgia? And honestly, if he is available, is he going to be 100%? Because I'm looking at my calendar right now. The game's about 3 weeks away. That was a tough injury last night. That was a tough hit that he took. It did not look pretty for his right arm. Ryan, you're saying you like Genty for the Heisman. I'll tell you like this. I've talked about this multiple times. I talked about it right after Boise beat UNLV to win the Mountain West Championship game. Travis Hunter plays every single down, but you just look at what Genty does running the football. That is a bad dude with the football in his hands. So you look at it, we've gotten to 12 teams, but the discussion in regards to strength of schedules, wins and losses, it's only gotten stronger and it's going to continue to be like this. And I've been saying this from the jump, regardless if it was the old system from like 30 years ago, where, a champion was just voted or crowned after the bowl games, or then the BCS system, or the 14 college playoff, or now the 12-team college playoff, and pretty soon the 14-team college playoff. You could have 20 teams in there. There's always going to be somebody that has a gripe. Just look at the NCAA tournament. Every single year, there's always a team that has a gripe, and that problem is not going away anytime soon. I know that some of the folks around Alabama's program now are talking about, scheduling, having a cupcake non-conference schedule now. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those where you could try to tweak things as much as you want, but like I said, the bottom line is you got to take care of your business on the field each and every Saturday. That's the bottom line. Some leagues are stronger than others. I expected the SEC and the Big Ten to dominate the bids for this tournament. I said seven combined in the preseason between the SEC and the Big Ten, and we got seven. Okay, I did not expect the ACC to get two. I expected Notre Dame to be in this mix. But nonetheless, that's the name of the game. Okay. And I know that there are going to be some people, and there are some people right now frustrated, rightfully so. But this is the system, this is the format that was agreed upon by the powers that be, just like it was for the 14 playoff, just like it was for the BCS. With the BCS and with the 14 playoff, there was a possibility that you could get two teams from the same conference get to that tournament. We saw it with the BCS. We saw LSU and Alabama face off in the national championship. We saw, both Georgia and Alabama face off in the 14 playoff multiple times. Okay. We saw a group of five champion get into the field of four before with Cincinnati. We've seen Notre Dame make it to the 14 playoff as well as the BCS championship multiple times. Okay. All of these factors, could play out, and they're playing out again. Again, it's the four highest ranked conference champions, not the power four, the four highest ranked. And you look at the expansion of this postseason, and it was basically because part of it was money, first and foremost, but then also the fact that, hey, you had conferences who just felt like their conference champion should get in just because. All right, before that, we would not have been having this conversation about the ACC champion. We would not have been having this conversation about the Big 12 champion. They're in. You got an opportunity to show up and show out. It was agreed upon that the highest ranked group of five champion would be in the field. That's Boise State. Okay. If the committee has them ranked higher than the ACC champion, then so be it. You got to deal with it. But at the end of the day, you got to go out there and take care of your business. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But nonetheless, I think that this is going to be a very interesting college football playoff because we don't know what to expect because it's the first time we're at 12. It's the first time that we're seeing games this late on campus. Okay, and not for an on-campus bowl game, on campus between power teams. So it's going to be very interesting from there. I think the other thing is going to be the injury factor. We've already seen the injury bug hit Georgia. And like I said, it's only a matter of time before we find out how serious that the injury to Carson Beck is going to be. And of course, injuries will play a factor in this tournament as far as who is able to escape from round number one, be injury free, and be as fresh as possible for the quarterfinal matchups. But nonetheless, I think we are in for a phenomenal tournament, excuse me. And regardless of whether or not that your favorite team is in this field of 12, I think you should still watch and I think you should still check it out because I do believe there's going to be some great action out there. It's the field of 12. It's the inaugural 12-team college football playoff. Don't get accustomed to it for too long because before you blink, we're going to be at 14. But nonetheless, let's see which one of these 12 teams has what it takes to be your national champion. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Ryan, as always, a pleasure to have you chiming in. And as always, I thank you for your support. And I do believe that the last time you were on here, you expressed the fact that you are a Florida Gator fan. If my memory doesn't fail me, and I'll say it like this: uh, okay, you are a Florida fan, since you answered that question. So my next question for you is this: who are you rooting for harder in this tournament? Are you rooting harder to see Ohio State beat Tennessee, or are you rooting harder to see the winner of Indiana Notre Dame knock off Georgia? Because it's kind of like with Gator fans, who do you like less? Is it Georgia or Tennessee? You know, it's one of those things. Pick your poison. But either way, I know you're not going to be rooting for. So like, yeah, that's a brain teaser. You might be up for the rest of the night thinking about that one. At least though, you know you're going to see Tennessee in round number one, and then you won't see Georgia to the quarter. So nonetheless, you're going to have some time to get your frustration out against either one of those teams. Like I said, it's pick your poison. But nonetheless, the college football playoff, the beginning of the college football playoff is right around the corner. I'm going to have more to talk about with that. I still got more to talk about with some things going around in the world of college football as well. You're saying you can't root for UT, big bro, but I hate UGA also. I'll tell you like this. I went to college with a guy who was a Georgia Bulldogs fan, and he wore his Georgia hat religiously. And I will say this: anytime, okay, matter of fact, for all of my years in college, Georgia never beat Florida. So every time around Halloween, that Saturday around Halloween, Ryan, that guy was always, and I mean always, in a bad mood. Some places take it a little bit more serious than others, and that rivalry between Georgia and Florida is real. But nonetheless, I'm sure that you know about that one as well. But nonetheless, fine folks, like I said, I'm going to have plenty to talk about between now and the start of the college football and all throughout the college football playoff as well. There's a lot more doings going around the college football landscape, transfer portal, bowl games, you name it. There is still a slew of things to talk about. And like I said, thank you all very much for your support. And like I said, the best, or like I always say, the best is yet to come. But nonetheless, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.